Hey, did I do it?
Right. Rock and or roll.
Man, I feel like one of you young kids figuring out all this newfangled stuff.
I realize when I'm like 33. I'm 33 and I have small children, and then my parents are of the older variety, and
be careful when you
technology. I'm sorry.
Be careful when you talk about your parents being of the older variety, because I have a feeling they're probably at least in my ballpark, if not younger.
I mean it in the most positive of terms. It means experience. It means, see how I walk that bat?
You did. Well done.
I try. How's your day been going, sir?
You know, I just made a little video for a guy that's doing a documentary on how we're all coping with this thing, and basically the bottom line, what I come down with, is that I'm pretty damn lucky, you know.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm learning most about this whole experience, is that how fortunate I am in that I could live like this and I could get outside. I don't know if you can see, but there's some nice nature outside. I could just step outside, you know, and you know, being from New York, my friends are in apartment buildings and can't get out. They have to get into elevators in a high rise. So I'm doing okay. If that was how am I doing today? I'm doing okay.
Perfect. How have you been spending your time during quarantine?
Well, like I said, I try to get outdoors as much as I can, and of course separate myself from people, but I'm fortunate that I could do that here. And I watch way too much news. That's something I do. I've stopped watching the late afternoon briefings because that just raised my blood pressure. But I do, I get my updates from Andrew Cuomo in the morning, and that kind of, they feel empathetic to me and they feel fact-based, and it attaches me back to my hometown of New York. I'm out here in LA. And, you know, the thing I feel, you know, there was a certain feeling. I was out here for 9/11 as well. I was in LA. And like I said, I'm a native New Yorker, and there was such a helpless feeling after 9/11. You know, I just wanted to be back there. I wanted to do something. I felt guilty for not being there. And there's a sense of that now as well. It's a strange emotion.
Yeah. What was your experience? What is the difference between living, because you grew up in Queens, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes. Yeah.
So you grew up out there. You're around New York and New Jersey post 9/11. I believe your character on The Sopranos, Little Carmine, came on in season 4. So that was the first season after 9/11.
I believe it was right. It was right. It was after 9/11. Yeah, because what I most remember is that if you remember, there was a shot in the opening credits where you could see the World Trade Center in Tony's rearview mirror.
I know, and there's like a lens flare from season 4 forward.
Yeah. So that was interesting. I think The Sopranos might have been the first time I worked again in New York after 9/11. I think it was.
Was Dynasty set in New York? I never saw it, but I know you were a part of it.
Oh, that's because you're 33 years old. It's been off the air for 30 years. You know, that was set, oddly enough, I don't know how I ended up on the show. It was set in Denver.
Okay.
But shot all in LA. We never went on location. It was, you know, yeah, shot all in LA. Yeah.
So you came on your character on The Sopranos came on like kind of halfway through the series. Were you a fan before you auditioned?
Well, that's interesting. You know, I watched the first few seasons and I was a big fan, and I was torn a little bit because there was the whole, you know, way it depicts Italian Americans and people being it that way. But I got past it because I knew that there is an element in most society of like that. And then there was the episode where Ralphie beat up and killed the dancer, that beautiful young dancer. And it just got to me, and I just said, yeah, I'm not going to watch this anymore. And I stopped watching it at that point. And then I got the part, so of course,
naturally,
you know, being what we are as actors, I was going to say horror that we are as actors, I went back and I watched them all again, and I realized again what I had forgotten was the genius of the show, and the fact that the reason David Chase did that scene with Ralphie, which turned me off, was because he felt that the audience was perhaps getting too enamored with these characters and forgetting who they were. So he put that scene in just to remind him that, some of these guys are not to be admired, remind us who they are. So
I love the way your character is alluded to, like even seasons before you come on screen. Like Carmine Sr.'s like, yeah, my son went to therapy because of the court order thing with his wife. They're very happy now.
Right. Yeah, and I think somebody refers to him as half a retard, which, yeah, I think, I remember thinking, oh wow, but I didn't know that until I got cast in it, and then I went back, like I said, and watched the old episodes. I saw that line, and I thought, wow, okay, I'm glad that line was written before they cast me, and it wasn't like, oh, well, we got Ray, might as well throw that line in. Yeah.
Well, your character was probably ripped on by the other characters more than most, but at the end of the day seemed to kind of get the big picture of things better than anybody. Like there's that famous scene between you and Gandolfini where your character backs away from the opportunity to become boss because like there's more to life than this. What was approaching that scene like?
That was, to me, that, it's so funny you should say that, because I just this morning found that clip and put it on my Instagram page, because with the statement that was my favorite scene for all the reasons that you're articulating right now, that it was a pivotal scene not only for my character, but I think for this show and for Tony, because as little Carmine explains through the analyzing his own dream, was that what's important in life was not being boss, but being happy. And I think little Carmine always kind of understood that, because he probably could have been more involved from the very beginning, and he only became involved once his father had that stroke, and then he was pulled in. Much like Michael gets pulled in, he didn't want to be, following Don Corleone's, but so he did. But he maybe he was a little bit more Fredo than Michael. But he did have I think he saw life differently than the other guys, maybe because he did step away and he just wanted to live a simple life, still take what he could, dip his beak in enough to live a very, very, very comfortable life and have a boat and all that. But I think he was always adverse to the violence and the fighting between the families, everything that went along with it.
He and Bobby seemed the most like, they were kind of brought into this life by happenstance and probably would have been just as happy with a 9-to-5.
I think you're right. Yeah, Bobby did have that because there's that great scene where he had never whacked anybody at all. He managed to stay out of it, and then Tony forces him to. Yeah. I think there are those guys. Half a wise guy, Vic, or whatever. Guys on the periphery, and maybe some of them are born into it. I think that's like in a lot of things with families where people are born into situations that maybe they didn't want to follow in their father's footsteps, but then they get pulled in.
For sure.
So, but I think you're right. I think little Carmine would have been very happy making his movies or doing whatever he's doing down in Miami and have his boat and his family. And yeah, absolutely.
I mean, think of how many more movies he would have under his subspecies if he just did that full time.
He'd probably have a whole species, not only the subspecies. He'd probably, it would be, I can't imagine.
A mega species?
Mega species. He'd have a mega species.
So when I interviewed you at Sopranos Con last November, I asked you this, and I just want to see if your answer is the same. Little Carmine is most known for his malapropisms. What is your favorite?
Oh, wow. One of the ones, there's several. Recently, I started doing this cameo thing. You know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started getting a lot of these requests, and everybody adds the lines that they want to hear. So all of a sudden, the lines coming back to me that I hadn't heard. But my favorite, because I thought it was so interesting, was "You're on the precipice, Tony, of an enormous crossroads." I just thought that was just. But also, mellifluous box is pretty damn good.
Fun fact. So I worked as an operations specialist for a delivery company out here in Chicago, like one of the big food delivery, chains. But my job was to manage a lot of our delivery drivers. Mm-hmm. And long story short, one of our drivers fucked up. He ended up stealing a laptop from one of our restaurants. And when I spoke to him over the phone with the purpose of firing him, I did tell him that he was at the precipice of an enormous crossroads. He didn't get it, but I got it.
Yeah, you got it. Well, it's important. It helped you get through it. I had to fire somebody once in my life, and it was one of the most traumatic things I've had to do. It's not.
Oh my God, tell me about it.
Oh, you really want to hear this story?
I do.
Okay. I was head writer and producer on a children's show on Nickelodeon.
Which one?
Wienerville.
I remember Wienerville.
Well, I was the head writer on Wienerville.
What?
Okay. And yeah, because I had written for the comedian Mark Wiener when when I met him, he was a mime. And then I started writing for him on the street. So he'd start talking. And then eventually we developed the stage act. And then he ended up getting a show on Nickelodeon. So I went on to be the head writer. Awesome. And I came in late. They had some other writers. And then he brought me in to take over because it wasn't happening. And he had hired one writer who was like kind of a joke writer. And so we were building the show. I had to get all these scripts together, and this guy just wasn't coming through with any scripts at all. And I had a limited budget, and I needed to hire another writer. And he was a very nervous guy. He'd walk by my office. If I had a friend visiting, he'd peek in because he was always very nervous. So the day I called the head of the executive of Nickelodeon, I said, "Look, I got to fire this guy. Just need the money to hire another writer who could produce." He said, "Sure, go ahead, fire him." So I call him into my office. He's so nervous, and he says, he doesn't know what it's for, but he says, "Before we start, could I call my wife and tell her I'm in your office and give her your extension number?" I said, "Yeah, sure." She goes, "Well, because we're expecting twins any day now, and I want to make sure."
Wow.
Yeah. So I had already committed to the, and I mean, he was making, I don't know, at that time, Nickelodeon, $300 or $400 a week. So, I mean, he wasn't about to support twins on this money. It was just a weekly deal. He wasn't losing medical, I would have said, stay. But it was just such an emotional, I mean, you couldn't have written that scene better than for him to say, can I give my wife your extension because we're expecting twins any minute. Yeah, so firing people is not fun. But he was, at that point, on the precipice of an enormous crossroads.
Yeah, you must have been in a real stagmire there.
He was in a stagmire.